Welcome to San Diego Integral, February 11th, 2023. Our presentation today is titled Intergenerational Patterns of Consciousness, presented by Kim Barta.
Welcome everyone to San Diego Integral. I'm Kathleen Andrews and I'm a member of San Diego Integral's leadership team. We have an exciting presentation today. Kim Barta is back for popular demand. His title is Intergenerational Patterns of Consciousness. We'll begin shortly, but I first want to mention we'll be recording this meeting. I think you agreed on that. If you prefer not to be seen on video, you can turn off your camera. We do like to see your smiling faces. We want to get to know each other. This is about us chatting, so please feel brave. But if you're moving your computer around or eating, we understand. You'll have your video off. The link to the recording will be posted on Meetup a day or two after this event. Also, you can find all our event information on our website at sandiegointegral.org. We're also on Meetup and Facebook, and you can find the links for those on our website as well. Please join one of these groups. That way you'll automatically be notified when a new event is added. If you have questions or comments about these meetings, you're welcome to contact one of the leadership team, either through Meetup or Facebook. That is Tom Habib, Jerry Golick, got Eloy, and we also have Liz, who does a lot of work on our website, but she hasn't been at one of our meetings in a while. Next month, we'll be meeting on March 11th, and the topic will be Lyman Pascal on integral shamanism. I met with him yesterday. He's going to have some great material, some breakouts, so we can process that. Karen Voorhees, I can see her. She's been a guest on his podcast before. He's got a really good show. It'll have he's really keen on having like a equivalent to a fireside circle, so that because he knows we want to get together and have process new material that comes forward when that happens. Finally, we'll invite you to make a small donation today. Donations help cover meetup fees, web hosting, and the hardware necessary for when we're getting ready to have hybrid meetings. Today, we've got several people that are here today at Tom Habib's house, so I feel like that's one step closer to us being actually back to hybrid, and which means some of us in person, and maybe we'll have satellite meetings, maybe in LA and Orange County, but we need some hardware to make that happen. So donations will be going towards that. Next page. We've had some trouble with Zoom bombers before, so we're trying different settings. It may be that when you're coming in, that we'll have everybody muted, and then so you will raise your hand in order for us to unmute you when you've got questions and comments. We do want to hear from everybody, so we're trying to have that not be an impediment, and then also not have the Zoom bombers be an impediment. So raise your hand and we'll have someone call on you, and so that we can, when we have our comment times after the breakouts, that we can hear from everybody. We'll also have a chat host. We'll be checking on chat in case you have questions as we go. And then right after the meeting, 6 o'clock Pacific time, we'll have an informal chat session for 30 to 60 minutes for further exploration, with more time to chat with our guests, but also for us to interact with each other. We don't just intend this to be a one-way back and forth with our guest. We want to have this be our integral living room. So we invite everybody to be present on that and just have more informal interactions. So before we start the presentation, we'd like to take a few moments to welcome newcomers. So if you have any guests, if this is your first time here, we do want to hear about your name and how you found us and where you're coming from. Who might be new here for the first time? Just speak up.
So raise your hand.
Raise your hand so we can know that you would like to be called on. John. Where is?
Hello. Found you on Meetup Search, the Explorer. And my name is John Mitchell, and I'm in near Madison, Wisconsin.
Welcome, John. And Ocean has her hand raised. I think you're unmuted, so go ahead.
Hello, first time joining. How are you? I live in Los Angeles, California, but I don't. Are you guys in like Carlsbad?
Yeah, Carlsbad, but then we've got attendees across the country and usually from overseas too. We've got some regular attendees in Australia and Europe.
Yeah.
Great. That's all. All right. I will, at this point, I'll turn the meeting over to Tom Habib, who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Kathleen. It is my pleasure to introduce Kim Bhatta. Kim is an internationally recognized speaker, workshop creator, and writer and psychotherapist. He's often invited to speak on podcasts like The Daily Evolver, Mystic Rising, and he will be at the Integral European Conference in May. Kim co-founded Stages International with his sister, Dr. Terry O'Fallon. He has operated a mind-body healing center in the Flathead Indian Reservation with his wonderful wife, Katie, for over 30 years. He provides courses on shadow and states, consciousness, relationship, grief, healthy power, parenting, and more. He's been conducting shadow work for over 3 decades. During this time, he's developed a unique, comprehensive meta model for shadow work. And he has a tool, an assessment tool that's available for free at kimbharta.org, KIMBARTA.org. So without further ado, and to relinquish my seat for Kim Bhatta.
All right. Hello, everybody. Tom and I are just in an exchange of seats here. I'm getting to take over his throne, and he's relinquishing it to me in kindness and care. So we appreciate your patience while we have the changing of the guards here. So let me see some smiles and love, everybody. How are you doing out there? Some thumbs up. Is life kind of good? Yeah. Do we sometimes have difficulties in life? Yeah, sometimes. Have you ever noticed that society runs perfectly smooth with no problems at all ever? No? Okay. So that's what we're going to be covering today, is we're going to take a look at how developmental levels look at each other over the course of their interactions. And what I'm going to put in chat is a reference for you to use throughout this talk. Okay, so I'm going to send it in right now. Hopefully you got it. What it does is, well, I'll explain what it does here in just a minute. But what I'm going to do is share my screen and get you on where we want to be. Okay, so we're going to be talking about today are the intergenerational patterns of consciousness, how different developmental levels collude, confuse, and collide. So this slide here is a comparison of Wilber and Dr. O'Fallon, the stages model. I just want to talk about the similarities first, because that'll help us move through what we're going to talk about. So consciousness evolves, both all stage work agrees that consciousness evolves in predictable ways. We each have a developmental range with a leading edge and a trailing edge. So we don't just sit at one developmental level, we span across several developmental levels. You might notice that in your life. Sometimes you're functioning like at the peak, and then sometimes you're not functioning at the peak. You know, you're waving back and forth across multiple developmental levels. The other standard thing that developmental models acknowledge is information above our leading edge can only be interpreted from the developmental level of our leading edge at best. So for example, if our leading edge is 4.0 green pluralist, and somebody talks to us from a 5.0 construct aware, we can only interpret that from a 4.0 perspective. We're not going to be able to understand it from a fifth person perspective because we're not there yet. Same is true when we talk or somebody talks at a 4.0 or 4.5 stage. 3.0 people can only, if their leading edge is 3.0, they can only interpret it from a 3.0 expert amber mythic stage. If their 2.5 is their leading edge, they can only interpret it from a conformist amber stage. So what we're going to be talking about is what do they do with information when they hear information coming in? Keep in mind that when we're at developmental levels, especially at these earlier developmental levels, 1.0 through 4.0, we don't realize that there are developmental levels very well. People don't conceptualize human development in that way. They conceptualize human development, but they conceptualize it more as in just learning different skills. They don't conceptualize it as a evolution of consciousness. And so when they interpret things that people say at later developmental levels, they really believe they're understanding it accurately and they're giving value added when actually that may not be what's happening. We're going to get into that. And you'll see that the first 8 stages are aligned pretty straight on. Now, I made this for you so that you can see just the person perspectives lined up with integral developmental levels. And when we use just the person perspectives to understand development, we can use them across Wilber, O'Fallon, Cook-Greuter, all of them. They all can be understood. It's like the Rosetta Stone. If you just use the person perspectives, you have the Rosetta Stone that you can use for understanding the developmental levels of whoever puts out developmental levels. And so this right here is something I made for you all so that you can see Wilber lined up with just the developmental levels themselves. And then I put in the chat, it doesn't have all the colors, but it has the numbers and the names on it. So you can use that for referring throughout the rest of this talk. Now, I created this model to help understand what are the developmental interactions of different developmental perspectives. There are 256 developmental stage interaction possibilities between 1.0 and 8.5 late supermind. And these are all of them. And they're all based upon the person perspectives. It doesn't matter what developmental theory you're using, they all use these person perspectives. And I want you to just imagine for a moment, if you had to try to manage developmental level understandings and interactions with stage names, how complex it would get. Imagine that each one of these cells each had names in them. It'd be hard to keep track of. So sometimes using the developmental perspectives allows you to look at larger patterns and larger amounts of information in a more efficient way. We're going to pare that down to just the first 8 stages up through teal. And even there are 64 developmental level interaction possibilities. And they are all listed up here in this chart. Now, the green cells are where equal developmental levels interact with each other in the social sphere. And this doesn't matter whether we're talking 2 individuals or 2 groups. The point is it's 1.0 interacting with 1.0. How do these people interact with each other? And of course, 1.0 infrared archaic are our babies. And how do babies interact when they are in a room together? Let's say you lay them down on a bed or on a floor together. How do they interact? Well, they don't interact much. There is a little bit of interaction. There's not a lot of awareness of other at 1.0. But if somebody's crying, the other one might cry too. Or if someone screams, the other one might scream too. Or if the other one coos, the other one might coo also. But there's not a lot of interaction or interpersonal dynamics going on. At 1.5, what we have is our toddlers. These are our toddlers that are running around. The Magenta Magic toddlers running around. And what they'll do is they have parallel play. They don't interact directly, but if somebody has something in their hands and the other one wants it, they'll take it out of their hands, and the other one will fight for it and try to take it back. And, you know, if that doesn't work, they might hit them over the head to get them to let go of it, and then they'll get it, or they won't get it, and then they'll cry. But there's not a lot of mutual understanding. They don't have what we call theory of mind yet. So this is kind of a battle of wills, but keep in mind, it's not all battle either. I mean, if somebody loves somebody, they will just come up and give them a big hug. You ever notice that? You know, these toddlers will run up and just jump on your lap and give you a big hug and just love you all up. Anybody notice that? Yeah. Yeah. How loved do you feel when they do that sometimes? I mean, sometimes it's just the sweetest thing in the world to see them come up and just give you that big hug, you know, and then they're gone. But the thing to keep in mind is that whether they're loving or not loving, it's just whatever their impulse is at the moment. They might hit you, they might spit on you, they might love you, whatever, you know, it's whatever is, whatever their impulse arising is in the moment. This is a place where actually some rapists are actually, while some rape is power and control issues, I've actually been able to document that some rapists are actually coming from 1.5. And what that is, they actually believe they are loving, in this case, the woman that they were, in several cases, the woman that they had raped, they actually believed that this was a loving relationship. And they were confused, utterly confused, why this woman wanted nothing to do with them ever again. They were adults, but they were at 1.5. And this is what 1.5 does. They just, if your child at 1.5 comes up and gives you a big hug, they assume that you want a big hug. You might be in the middle of doing something and actually kind of want to finish it. But they don't see that. They just know that they're filled with love, and therefore you are filled with love for them too. And so it's really interesting to see adults at this developmental level and how they interact and how they'll follow these women around wanting attention, and the women just don't want anything to do with them for obvious reasons. But this is the nature of 1.5 perception. 2.0, Red Magic Mythic. At 2.0, these are our school-age children. Now, what school-age children love to do on their own is they like to play with rules, roles, and responsibility and relationships. So what they'll do is they'll make imaginary play, and they'll make up the rules to the game, and they'll make up roles in the game. And those rules and roles will then engage in relationship. They'll engage in relationship with each other through those rules and roles. And the rules and roles are very flexible. The next game, all the things might change completely. They do not formulate on their own, like things like rigid, like leagues, like a basketball league or a baseball league. They don't do that. That comes next. At 2.5, you might remember our teenagers, they're running around creating cliques. And so you might remember how that was. You had to dress just right. You had to use just the right words. You had to have the right mannerisms. Otherwise, you were out, you were in group, or you were out group. And things got pretty nasty if you didn't follow all the codes. 2.5 will create structures, social structures. That's what is happening at that level. And so they'll create social structures within which to operate. Now, 2.5 might create a structure to put their children in, 2.0. So they might create a league for children to play baseball and play football or dance or whatever. But 2.0 doesn't generate those on their own. They like to do more imaginative, interactive, spontaneous play. We see a lot of 2.0s doing that, but that's because it's designed by later level adults. At 3.0, we have our Amber Mythic Rational. Okay, and at 3.0, what's happening is they're stepping a little bit outside of the bureaucracy of 2.5. 2.5 creates these bureaucracies to hold culture together. You can think about fundamentalist religions that way. 3.0 takes that fundamentalist religion or those fundamentalists, those really rigid rules, and they want to get some freedom. And so they want to become unique. They don't just want to be like everybody else anymore. They want to be unique. And so one of the things that happens at 3.0 Amber Mythic Rational is that once they step outside or get a new idea, they want to be unique. And then a 3.0 culture will create a race to the most unique. So 2.5 will create a race to the most, everybody's the same. Whoever can follow the same rules the best, those will be the highest in status. 3.0 flips that around and says whoever's the most unique has the highest status. And so you get this race to the most unique. You get the Lady Gaga effect, the most bizarre, the most outside of the box, the most unique you can be, the better you are. And a flip of that is also that if you get a new idea in your head, something that you value, whether it be a religion or an ideology, they're really strong on ideologies. They start comprehending ideologies. And so they get an ideology. And then what they want to do is they want to push it to the extreme, just like anything else. They want to push it to the extreme. So they want to see what they're actually doing in their mind is they're getting to the most pure extreme form of it. And the most extreme form is considered the most pure. So for them, conscious development is just getting to the absolute pure form of this. But as a result, in a 3.0 culture, you get people racing to the extreme pure form and colluding around that. But obviously not everybody agrees on the same ideology. So you have all these ideologies that everybody's raced to the extreme form of, and nobody can agree and come together on these because my extreme pure form, it's like, imagine that you believed in God and you had to be pure to go to heaven. And it doesn't matter whether it's a God of religion or whether it's just an ideology like capitalism or communism or whatever it is. Whatever the ideology is, you have to be pure. Otherwise, you are tainted. You have to be perfect. So you get this perfectionism, you get this purity, you get this race to the extreme. And as a result, anybody who's not that is considered vile. And so you can see this in politics today where there's this race to the extreme and so few people are being able to cross over and talk about both. And anyone who does is considered a traitor just because they're willing to talk to the other side. At 3.5, Orange Rational, we let go of that perfectionism and that extremism. To some degree, what we want to do is just achieve. We want to achieve. And so we will do what will allow us to accomplish the goals and plans that we have. We like goals, we like plans. We can imagine a future better now at 3.5, and we can imagine how to create that future. So we go about how to bend reality to our image. And so one thing that I've often said is almost all marriages are born in this image creation of the other person, and almost all divorces are also created when that image crashes and you start meeting the real person. And you can't handle that because you married a person. You actually married your image. You didn't marry the person. And when you realize the person didn't meet the image, a lot of times what they say is, you changed. Well, no, they didn't change. You just quit projecting your image onto them and you started realizing who they were. I'm not saying they didn't change ever. I'm just saying that's a common thing that happens here. 4.0, when 4.0 people, green, pluralistic, get together, what they do is they want to move towards authenticity. They want to include the entire world on the large scale, on the outside, and then on the intimacy scale, they want to move to deep authenticity. So this is a very beautiful stage where you're, for the first time, you're considering the whole world as opposed to just what I want. And for the first time, you're wanting to consider the whole world and you're wanting to have deep intimacy. And anybody that you interact with you're seeking more of a deeper, authentic, intimate connection. As a result, a lot of times there's a lot of inefficiency because there's more interest in the authentic connection than there is in accomplishing the goal, because they just got out of goals and they don't want to live that world anymore because it's not rewarding or fulfilling anymore. but by pushing away, because each stage tends to push away the stage before it a little bit, as we push away that, then you lose efficiency. And then 2 4.5 teals will be looking at complex adaptive system patterns in the whole of the world and even beyond the world. How cultures interact with cultures, how people within those cultures interact, how subcultures within cultures interact, how individuals interact, and how our internal world interfaces with the external world, which has an impact upon the external systems, and the external systems have an impact upon our internal systems, like the way we think, the way we feel, the different parts inside of us, our different personas and personalities. So this is an example of developmental levels when they interact with each other when they're the same developmental level. Now, the blue cells are where later developmental levels are dominant in the social sphere. And what I mean by dominant, I don't mean they dominate. What I just means is they're more robust. They're more robust in the social sphere. So all the blue cells are where the later developmental level is more robust, and so they tend to have more impact upon the culture or the interpersonal interaction. And so it includes every possible unequal developmental interaction. All the green ones are the equal developmental interactions. The blue cells were all the unequal developmental interactions, where the later developmental level has a little more robustness in the interaction. An example of this would be healthy parenting. In healthy parenting, we would want the later developmental level parent to be a little more strong in guiding that family culture than, say, a 1.5 child that wants to run out in the middle of the street and grab a ball. That probably wouldn't be wise to let the 1.5 child dominate that social interaction. Now, the red cells are where the earlier developmental levels dominate the social sphere. It includes all the possible unequal developmental interactions, but the earlier developmental level is on top or dominant. And this is an example when children dominate parents, for example, or when earlier developmental levels take control of a culture, which we have seen many revolutions do. Some revolutions are later developmental levels doing a revolution, but some revolutions are earlier developmental levels taking over a later developmental level culture. And so some people might say, well, how could a 1.0 like dominate a 3.0? That's ridiculous. 3.0 is an adult. How could a 1.0 dominate that? But anybody who's been a parent knows very well that if you have a baby who's colicky, they will dominate you. They will control your life and control the social sphere. They will cry all day, all night until 3.0, until no matter what later level parent you are burned out, you are lost, you are exhausted, and you just can't handle it anymore. So yes, earlier developmental levels can routinely take control of a later level culture or a later level individual. Blue cells are where later developmental levels are stronger, and red cells are where younger or earlier developmental levels are stronger. And for every blue cell combination, there's a red cell combination. So for example, here we have 3.0 with 2.0. In the blue, 3.0 is on top, so we know the 3.0 individual or culture is a little stronger and more robust in this interaction. But we have the same pattern, 2.0 and 3.0. It's just that this time the 2.0 is dominating. Same with 4.0 and 1.5. Same with 4.5 and 3.0. I have every possible combination here for you. Children live mostly in the purple box. These are our childhood stages, 1.0, 1.5, 2.0, and 2.5, and how their different interactions might be. And adults live mostly in the yellow box. And this is where our parents tend to be interacting with each other and with other parents and other adults. And the yellow box is an upshift of the purple box. So for example, 1.0, you can see a very similar pattern with 3.0. While 1.0 will cry, 1.0 can't get what they want on their own, so they will cry for attention. They'll cry for attention, they'll scream for attention so that things will happen for them. And 3.0 does a similar thing. They will move to the extreme to get attention. They will do whatever they can. They'll say outlandish things. They'll go to extremes to get attention, whatever can get the most attention, the most voracious attention. That's their way of doing that. 1.5 will hit people over the head. They'll do whatever they can do to get what they want. And 3.5, if you just think about corporate culture, they're willing to do whatever they want to do to the environment to get what they want. They're not thinking systemically yet on a true earth-wide systemic level. It's more like, how can I get what I want? 2.0, they want to interact. They want to interact with all their friends. They just want to get along. They want to have fun together. And 4.0 wraps up the entire world and just wants the whole world to get along. Whoever is the biggest victim, they want to take care of because they want us all to be friends. And they tend to want to rescue victims, and they want to hold perpetrators at bay. They want to hold them off because perpetrators keep everyone from being equal. And then 2.5 creates social systems. They create bureaucracies for people to live in, whether they be religious bureaucracies or political bureaucracies. And 4.5 sees complex adaptive systems. They're both systems oriented. It's just that the level of system is vastly different. 4.5 sees the entire earth-based ecosystems and how they interact with social systems, how they interact with culture, how they interact with psychology, how they interact with inner psychology, how they interact with public psychology, how corporate culture has interactive cycles with earth system cycles, and how all these things interact. So they're both systems oriented. It's just that one's an upshift of the other. The green box is an example of healthy parenting. This is where the parents tend to be in charge of the social dynamic. And the red box is an example of usually unhealthy parenting, where the child dominates the social public sphere. Now, that doesn't mean that parents can't get down on the ground and play with their children and be equal and even let the children lead, but they're doing it from a conscious level, okay? They're doing it from a later level, but they're playing the role of an earlier level to give children more experience. So how do developmental levels interact? What are the developmental relationship dynamics on both individual interactions and collective ones? We can use this with peers, with colleagues, with couples, with parenting, with generations, with any collective. And so for now, let's just focus on the blue boxes. How does the later generation, and when I say later generation, it's later developmental generation, but often that's the later age generation too, it just depends. But it's not always age related by any means. But how does the later generation attempt to populate its developmental perspective? How does it try to teach its wisdom, in other words? And how does the earlier developmental level interpret them? And remember, one can only interpret what they hear from their own latest developmental level at the best. They might not even interpret it from their latest developmental level. They might interpret it from a mid-range developmental level or from a trailing edge developmental level. Or if we have a shadow crash, we might interpret it from a shadow crash developmental level. If we were a 3.0 parent, how would children respond? And we're going to get to whole cultural dynamics at some point here. But if we're a 3.0 parent, how would children respond? So let's just think about this. We have a 3.0 parent. What they want to do is they want to be an expert and they want to be perfect, and they kind of like being outside of the box. So how does a 3.0 do this? Well, 3.0 parents, and we're going to be talking just healthy developmental levels here. I'm not talking about if they get disturbed, okay? Because that's a whole nother lecture. That's a whole shadow lecture. But this is just what happens at best when we're healthy. So we have a 3.0. They're going to apply this to, say, parenting. They're going to research the parenting. They're going to try to do it perfect, and they're going to be the perfect parent. They're going to get the perfect stroller. They're going to get the perfect clothes. They're going to get the perfect parenting books. They're going to research it. They're going to figure it out, and they're going to do it perfect. And when their children grow up to 1.5, they're going to try to help their children be perfect. They're going to try to help their toddlers be perfect. And they're going to be raising these children in a perfectionistic, value-oriented environment. Has anybody here ever felt hooked by their perfectionism, kind of frozen by it, kind of had by their perfectionism? Anybody? Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. Okay. Perhaps you might have been raised somewhat by a perfectionistic parent. We also have a little bit of a perfectionistic culture going on, a 3.0 culture. So you might have just got it through the osmosis of the culture. But 1.5 children will feel that they need to be perfect. And then when we're 2.0, that will grow up to, how am I a perfect friend? Oh my God, I have to be a perfect friend. Oh my gosh, maybe I said one little tiny thing that wasn't right. Oh my gosh, I'm not the perfect friend. Anybody ever feel that? Anybody ever feel like maybe they didn't do the perfect friend move? Okay, yeah. So we get that going on. Okay, so now our children are growing up in this perfectionistic environment. And now when we get to 2.5, our children get to 2.5. What did 2.5 do? They create a social embedded structure that holds whatever their beliefs are into a lifelong permanent structure. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't change over time. What I'm saying is 2.5 creates social structures that are permanent, where 2.0 creates social structures that can move around a lot and they're not permanent. And 2.5, for example, is what allows nation states to occur, for nations to last, and different things like that. So that what they'll do is they'll take that perfectionism or that extremism or that purity, and they'll turn it into kind of like a fundamentalist religion. This is the way you're supposed to be. And if you're not, you're bad. Shame, blame, guilt. So while 3.0 might actually be just coming from a pure place of, hey, let's just be perfect. Let's be as perfect as we can. When a child grows up through that and comes to 2.5, there's going to be shame, blame, and guilt around not being perfect and or around anybody else not being perfect. You were not a perfect friend, therefore you are out or you are bad. Shame on you for not being a perfect friend. That's how it's going to come out. That's how it often comes out. Now imagine that becomes the new religion, and I need to turn that to the extreme, because 3.0 likes to move to the extreme. What's that going to do? What kind of culture will be built? What happens when these children raised by 3.0 become adults and start impacting society? They start impacting commerce, politics, and media. Why don't you just kind of imagine that for a while? I'm going to walk you through this one, and we're going to do some breakout groups on the next one. So 3.0 then will take this perfectionistic idea and they'll try to create perfect products. So they'll try to create a perfect system. They'll push them to the extreme, and they'll create extremes in political parties. And so these extremes, both sides will believe they're right, and both sides will believe that they're pure, and neither side will be able to hear the other one, because hearing the other side is tantamount to not being pure anymore. Does anybody recognize this experience in our life today? Yeah. Okay. So this is how we're building a culture. Now, keep in mind, that's not necessarily what was intended, but that's what happens when early developmentals grow up through a particular developmental level worldview. Now, there's a 3.5 parent. How would children respond? Well, 3.5 parents want to achieve, and they're going to, in this case, be healthy achiever parents. So they want to create the best parenting they can. They want their child to be the best they can, not necessarily perfect by an outside standard, but the best that child can possibly be. So it's a similar stress to 3.0, but it's a little bit different. I always have to be my best. If I am not my best, there's something wrong with me. So now as a child running around, you have to be your best. And so achiever parents will often be getting them into, well, 3.0 will do this too, but 3.5 parents will getting them into, early childhood violin lessons, and they have to be the best violinist that they can be. 3.0 would do that too and tell them they have to be a perfect violinist. 3.5 would say they have to be the best that they can be. They have the best that they can be. They'll get them into soccer. They'll get them into all these things. They'll get them into early reading, and they have to just push the edge of the best that they can possibly be. And now we get to 2.0, and they have to be the best friend. They have to always be the best. And this thing about being the best tends to have a bias towards leadership. So what they'll do is they'll grow the 2.0, they'll keep saying, why aren't you a leader? Why aren't you a leader? You should be a leader, not a follower. Ever hear those words? Anybody hear that? How about when you were growing up? Did you ever hear that even? Yeah. Okay. That's what happens. You have achiever parents, and they just can't understand why anybody would be a follower. Well, at 2.0, keep in mind what we're doing is we're learning how to get along. We're learning how to be a tribe. We're learning how to be equal with people. We just got out of 1.5 where we thought we're the only human being, the only consciousness in the world, and treated other people pretty poorly. And now we just discovered there's other consciousnesses in the world. I can have friends. I want to be equal. I don't want to stick out. I want to be equal. And now 3.5 parenting, even healthy 3.5 parenting with no intent or no shadow, will tend to have these 2.0 children that need to be equal and just engage in egalitarian play feel like they have to be leaders. So now they go into their groups and they're trying to be a leader when other people are trying to be equal. How do you think those children are treated by their peers when they're always acting like they need to be the leader? Yeah, so there's a couple things happen. One is they get rejected. The other is they become the dominant leader and everybody starts following them to some degree. But either way, there's a lot of problems that come up. Okay, and then let's take that and bring that to 2.5. Keep in mind 2.5 what will they do? They'll make a religion out of it. Now, when I say religion, I don't necessarily mean a sacred religion with a god. I just mean they will institutionalize it as a bureaucratic, fundamentalist way to be in the world. So now what we're saying is you need to achieve, you need to be your very best to be okay. And if you're not, you're bad. Blame, shame, guilt. Blame, shame, guilt. And then when they grow up to 3.0, they push that to the extreme. And we have extreme opposites of what people should be good at, what constitutes being good at something, and they can't agree on it. So we have these two different groups, actually hundreds of groups, but in this case, let's just take two different groups that are pushing the very best that they can be at whatever they think they should be. And keep in mind, 3.0 is about ideologies. So they're pushing, I'm going to be the very best Trump person I can be, or I'm going to be the very best liberal person, or the very best conservative, or the very best jazz musician, or the very best classical musician. And I'm going to create a culture around that. So you'll even see these political cultures arise in things that are not like government politics. You'll see these politics arise like in book clubs. I have to be the smartest one in the book club. I have to be the most pure one. If I'm 3.0, if I was raised in 3.5, I have to be the best that I can be in the book club. I have to really achieve in the book club, or in just a playful dance interaction or something like that. Okay. So now we have, what if our parents are 4.0? How would the children respond? So if we have a 4.0 parent, what they want to do is they want to be deeply intimate, and they'll drop into close connection with their 1.0. They'll drop into close connection with their 1.5. They'll be very supportive. The thing about 4.0 is they want to be equal. And so when you have a 1.5 child that's running around beating people over the head, they can sometimes dominate the 4.0 because, well, there's a couple things can happen. Like, let's say a 1.5 is interacting with another 1.5, and they're hitting their peer over the head, the 4.0 might say something like, because they don't want to be dominant and they don't want to be aggressive. So they might say, oh, Johnny, please stop hitting Sally. Please don't hit her anymore. Whack, whack, whack. Johnny, come on, let's talk about this now. We shouldn't be hitting. And they'll try to do it through this egalitarian engagement, while the 1.5 just keeps doing whatever it is they want. And they might run around and follow them around and try to get them to do it, plead with them, try to get it through, because they don't want to be this dominant thing like 3.5. They see how 3.5 has just trashed and destroyed the world, and they don't want to be dominant. So they want to do everything equal. And as a result, though, 1.5 can often walk all over them and dominate the culture of 4.0. But let's say they didn't. Let's say that they got through that, and it was about deep engagement, deep authenticity. And this is a strange thing that happens with my happy, wonderful 4.0 parents when they get 2.0 children, and the 2.0 children finally want to, engage in reciprocity, which is what 4.0 wants so bad. They drop in deep with their 2.0, and it just blows their 2.0 children out of the water, because their 2.0 children are not ready to talk about the type of deep authenticity that 4.0 is just craving so much. And so they often feel overwhelmed by the 4.0. But let's just say they don't. Let's say that 4.0 manages that really well and just really teaches them about deep authenticity and just being genuine and thinking about the globe and the whole world, and how we need to consider the whole world. We need to consider the globe and the environment, all these beautiful values. What happens when they grow up to 2.5 and they turn it into a religious fundamentalist ideology, or not ideology, but religion? Now, all of a sudden, shame, blame, guilt, if you don't recycle, if you don't, put solar panels on your house, if you don't do whatever. And then as we go to 3.0, we push that to the extreme. You have to be the most pure person of environmentalism. If not, you are bad, you are impure, you are the evil opposite side. And so when these children grow up, you ever hear about the mean green meme? How many people have heard about that? The mean green meme that's been taught quite a bit. I'm convinced that most of the mean green meme is not really green, not really 4.0. It's the children raised by 4.0 that turn it into a fundamentalist religion and an extremist ideology, and then use blame, shame, guilt, and eradication to deal with these values that they've been taught as they grew up through life. So 4.5 and 3.0 interact. If you have an amber mythic rational teal person and a 3.0 person is hearing what they're saying, keep in mind the 3.0 person will move out of the box. They'll turn it into an ideology and get it into an extreme out-of-the-box ideology to get attention. And they'll push that ideology to the extreme to get attention until it works. And so what you have is, if you take a look at this, and I hope you can see my cursor, but you have the 4.5s and the 4.0s coming up with really beautiful cultural ideas. Really beautiful cultural ideas, like, things that involve health for the entire planet. But a 3.0 cannot see it from a 4.5 perspective. 4.5 echoes 2.5. They're both even 0.5 developmental levels. So what they'll do is they'll interpret it as a religion. They'll interpret these beautiful, treat everybody with love and respect as a religion. And then if you don't, you are actually evil. So when we talk about like these 4.0 values of inclusion, we want to include, right? We don't want to exclude people. We want to include all kinds of people in the world. 2.5 will turn that into a religion. And if you don't include, then you are shame, blame, guilt, and pushed away. And then they grow that up to an ideology and make an extremist ideology out of that. So you see this echo from 4.5, interpreted at 2.5, and then growing up to 3.0. And as a result, we have 3.0 now interacting with a 4.0 culture. So what happens when 3.0 dominates 4.0? 4.0, keep in mind, wants to be equal, reciprocal, compassionate, and wants to rescue the victim. So 3.0 takes on an ideology that they're the biggest victim. What does 4.0 do? They'll rescue them, of course. They'll empathize with them, even if they're not victim. So 3.0s learn to hack 4.0s by playing the biggest victim, even if they're not the biggest victim. And then 4.0 will raise their 2.0 children to believe that certain people are victims. I'm not saying they're not victims, but they'll raise them that way. And then you have this dynamic going on. 4.5 comes up with really great ideas, such as cultural appropriation. That's a very beautiful, complex 4.5 idea. We don't want to engage in cultural appropriation, because if we engage in cultural appropriation, we steal ideas from other cultures without their permission, not just their artifacts, but their ideas. And then we profit off of them. And then that marginalizes the people themselves from which these ideas came from. Now, there's some really interesting dynamics going to come on. I'm going to break out into small groups around this in just a moment. So what happens is 3.0 interprets that and makes that, and it takes that to the extreme, okay? In other words, 4.5 will say, it's okay to have cultural sharing. We don't want cultural appropriation. Those are two different things, but that takes more nuance than a 3.0 has. So 3.0 will just turn it into an ideology. No cultural appropriation, which means you can't do any cultural sharing. They're going to take it to the extreme. And then the 4.0s are going to want to be equal and raise their 2.0 children that way. So today, what I see in our society is 3.0 dominating the social landscape. And there's a couple of reasons for that. We do have a lot of 3.0s, but also 3.0s today grew up in a media environment with all the cell phones and everything. They were the first generation to actually grow up fully with cell phones. And they know how to use it. They know how to dominate the media. They know how to engage and interact. And so right now we have a high abundance of 3.0 interpretations of really great ideas, but they have interpreted them at 3.0 and they've dominated the media. And now we hear things that sound good on one idea because the content sounds good, but the behaviors around it are almost horrifying. And it's a little confusing. How do we make sense of this? So I want you to take an idea in our breakout groups. I want you to take an idea, pick a current social topic. Notice a 4.5 complex adaptive nature of it, some really beautiful globalistic orientation, all right? It can be on anything: racism, sexism, classism, cultural appropriation, gender, whatever you want, anything that strikes your passion. And then notice, how would 2.5 simplify that into a good, bad, right, wrong, black and white thinking? And how would 3.0 then come up with the most extreme, pure vision of it and purify it to the point that it's absolutely ridiculous and dysfunctional, and not be able to hear any other side of it? So go ahead and break out into the groups. Pick out your topic, some nice, beautiful, beautiful 4.0, 4.5 topic, and then notice how would you simplify that into just simple black and white, right and wrong, and then how would you push it to the extreme?
Breakout sessions are not recorded.
We're back, Kim.
Hi, everybody. How'd that go? I'd like to hear if anybody would like to share from their group what they discovered, or what they thought, what happened. Okay, well, in the meantime, I'll state a few things till we can figure out if somebody can share. There are a few questions. One was, of course, not all children go to the extreme. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about generalizing orientations. And of course, parents do come from multiple developmental levels, and that's what helps smooth a lot of this out. But the generalizing orientations are still very valuable because we do see how they operate, and we do see that this happens a lot, and we can see it happen in ourselves and in others when it does happen this way. I just want to check in. Can anybody hear me? Are people hearing me? Okay, good. Okay. Okay, super. And so Eloy, is it okay if anybody comes on and just shares what they heard or talked about?
Yep.
Okay.
We're good now.
Did anybody want to do that? Or do you want to hear me? Yeah, okay. Like Trudy, I saw you put a thumbs up. Go ahead and come online.
Trying to unmute myself here. Okay, so the example I brought up is I live in a very conservative town. And there's a lot of snowbirds that come here. But for example, if anybody knows the meanest sheriff in America, Joe Arpaio, the pink underwear guy, he lives here. So we were fortunate enough to get a more liberal mayor elected. And she's a woman. I know her. She's fair and she's unbiased for the most part. But our town council, the weight of it shifted from more liberal to more conservative. And so the conservatives are kind of like hell-bent on having, throwing out all the old, which was voted on almost unanimously by the former council, to throwing all that out and starting over. So from the first day, they came in and said, we used to have a 1-minute moment of silence at the beginning of meetings. And they said, no, we need to have a 1-minute moment of prayer. And then there was this huge argument about, well, why don't we just leave it silence? And they said, no, it has to be Christian related. So now it's kind of acquiesced to the point where they got their way, but it's only people from a Christian faith who are allowed to do a 1-minute prayer. There is no 1 minute of silence, and you can't have, like Buddhist or atheist or Zen people or anybody else. It's just Christians.
Yeah, beautiful, Trudy. Thank you. Great example, an example where you take something that's supporting everybody from any tradition, even atheists can enjoy a moment of silence, and then simplify it again to a black and white idea, turning it into an extremist version of that, and then it gets institutionalized in the bureaucracy. Thank you. Yeah. Anybody else want to share? Yeah, Carol.
Well, we had a fascinating discussion. I'm not sure if we followed the directions, but we were looking at the concept of empathetic listening. And then trying to pick a topic, we chose gun control, and then talked about the extremes. And we were suggesting that perhaps we're putting our police officers in the extremes, because on the one hand, they're told to be empathetic and listen to the citizens and pay attention to their needs. On the other hand, we give them the responsibility for eliminating guns. Don't allow the guns to be used. So they are caught between these two very strong opinions.
Yes, they are caught between the strong opinions. And how did those opinions form? So, for example, you mentioned that we have a concept of some form of gun control, not elimination of guns, but maybe gun registration. And what's the counter argument often? If you allow registration, then
only the criminals will have guns. Certainly.
Yeah, they take it from registration to that's just that, you know, if you start down that road, then ultimately the extreme is what's going to happen. So you have the extreme fear on the one hand and the extreme purity on the other, and not seeing the nuances and being able to hold the nuances. So if we take one step in that direction, you've eliminated the purity. It's all going to go to hell in a handbasket. You know, gun registration is the same as taking your guns away for the future. And so being able to hold the nuances are gone. And now you have these extreme versions of absolute gun freedom and, you know, maybe even eliminate guns, you know, gun buyback programs and I'm not saying either one is right or wrong, but what we're seeing is the cultural dynamic that's so extreme, the two sides can't even hear each other and talk about the nuances. And so that's a great example, Carol. Thank you.
This is Marjorie. I was also in on that discussion. And one of the things that we mentioned also was in situations where the police are domestic violence or whatever it might be, and they're called to go in, and society is asking them to be empathetic, to go in, try to discern and listen to the situation, try to get a feel of it. And yet at the same time, as a police officer, we're also expecting them to stop the violence.
Exactly.
If meeting violence with violence.
Right.
And that's what we expect from them. So we're expecting them to immediately jump from a higher level of empathy back down into a eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, red. Yeah. And of course, often they're not going to get it right. So when they don't get it right, and who's to say what's right? But when they don't get it right, then society is then called upon to be empathetic to the police officers. And that's where I think
or to punish them if they're not perfect. Notice how they have to be perfect, right? And if they're not perfect, can you imagine going through your day knowing that any day you could be shot, you know, that somebody reaches down at the bottom of their car and you don't know whether it's a gun or not, and you don't want to shoot them, but you don't want to get shot. And if you call it imperfectly, then you're demonized as an evil person, because there's no ability to talk about the nuances of their situation. So that's great, Marjorie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. In our group, it came down to, I would categorize it as the extremes of political correctness.
Yeah, tell me more about that.
Oh, just the demands for political correctness, and then the response to it, like the agitation that comes from having to do things that we didn't have to do before. I have an example of that here in this meeting. We did a whole lot of work to make the meeting safe. And, we want that balance of inclusive and safe. So anyway, there's just all kinds of challenges with it. And then there's that purity part of the political correctness that you mentioned, that it has to be just so.
Yeah.
And then the reaction is, I ain't doing it at all.
Yeah. And so you see how the purity of both sides keeps getting pushed further and further away. What's pure? Oh, well, let's go to the next extreme. Now that's more pure. And I mean, we had, only a few people left that were willing to talk to the other side, and they were both demonized. The Republicans were demonized by the Republicans, and the Democrats were demonized by the Democrats for having the courage to talk to the other side, So they were, and so it's really interesting to note that both extremes, the Democrats and the Republicans, behaved in the same way. The content was different, right? It was a liberal content versus conservative content, but they actually both really attacked their own people as if they were traitors exactly the same way. And this is what we see with 3.0 dominating a cultural landscape, is you will attack your own people for betraying it, even just because you're being reasonable. Yeah. Thank you, Eli.
Good night.
Anybody else? Oh, yeah. Elliot.
So I picked the gender bubble globally. And so I aim for the 4.5, the teal holistic perspective being that people are showing up in all kinds of new gender orientations and presentations, and we want to accept them exactly as they are and welcome them in and be supportive of however they want to show up. And so then the reduction down to 2.5 is there's a right way to there's a right attitude to have towards people, and there's a wrong attitude to have towards people. And if you have the wrong attitude, you're bad. And that's the pure purification of that is there's a right way to be, and we need to make sure that everyone is being in the right way to be.
Yeah. And can you give me a specific on that, Elliot? You're right on target here. Do you have some specifics? Because those are kind of fun sometimes.
Specifics of the right way to be?
Yeah.
The right attitude. Like if you're not accepting people, then you're yourself bad. Yes. And the only way is to be as accepting as possible, no matter how the other person shows up. Like you have to provide a safe container for all of your peers, friends, strangers, anyone who is in your presence. This is so interesting. I can see my pathology showing up. That's very cool. Because I have the helper pathology going on today.
Yeah, I
don't always see very clearly, but the responsibility. It's something like it's my responsibility to take care of anyone that I ever witness and hold the container for them.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. Good observation. Yeah. So the gender one's very interesting that way. So one way that this is playing out also is you have all the complexity of gender versus sex, gender versus all these other different dynamics that go on, sexual orientation being one of them, and all of them being separate items, but getting boiled down to simplified ideas, such as if I identify with it, then I am. And if you don't agree with that, then you're wrong and evil. So I can support a gender person at 4.5, but if I don't buy into the storyline of the exact words to use with somebody at 3.0, then I will be seen as anti-pro, right? Because I'm not saying I'm not using the right words because I'm using something more nuanced. Another example of that is if I can't say this one because this is this is my next breakout group, so I'll save it for later. But this is great, Eli. Elliot. This is great. Yeah. But if you don't say that the research says what we say it says, like if you take all the research and put it together and actually really look at it and the quality of the research, if you actually try to do that, you will be seen as anti, because you're not just accepting the research that they point to that say that's okay. So this is a really important point, because at 3.0, we get data, but we don't get science. So I want you to notice the difference. So what we'll do in 3.0 is we'll have a mythic belief, and we'll take data and use data to support our mythic belief. But the switch between 3.0 and 3.5 is I'll get data and I'll change my belief to meet the data. So that's a crucial crossover point. And I'm sure how many people have noticed that we cherry pick our data sometimes to support our belief. Anybody do that? Yeah. So we got us some 3.0 in ourselves. But when we have a whole culture that's based around that, and we can't even look in at it and see it, man, that becomes impactful, because everybody's playing with their myths and everybody's playing with all this data, but they're willing to switch the data. They're willing to manipulate the data. They're willing to lie about the data to support their myth. rather than letting their belief change to meet what the data actually says. And you will see that in the gender relation stuff, that if you actually start talking about the nuances of the research, you will be considered anti-trans by the 3.0 trans culture, as opposed to the 4.0 or the 4.5 trans culture, which is also out there, but you just don't hear them as loud.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I'm curious if there is something you're doing in your listening to, like, as a practice, to listen for different levels or to listen to where people are at.
Yeah, I gave you one just now, actually. You know, if I give new data, does that help change the belief, or do they reject the data all out because it doesn't meet their beliefs, right? That helps me distinguish between 3.0 and 3.5. 3.5 wants the truth. 3.0 wants the mythology still. 2.5 wants the mythology, and they don't care about the data. I don't care about the data. This is my belief, and it doesn't matter what the data says. 3.0, this is my belief. The data supports it. Your data is wrong. My data is right. Yeah, I think you've even heard some politicians say, this is our facts. Those are your facts, right? It's like, that's not 3.5 thinking. That's 3.0 thinking. There's no such thing as my facts and your facts. There's a bunch of facts. Let's put them together. Let's figure out the best truth, right? Let's figure out the truth and let's shape our beliefs to it. So that helps you distinguish. 2.5 doesn't even care about the data. 3.0 cares about the data as long as it supports their mythic belief. 3.0 cares about the data because they want the truth, okay? 4.0, you know, cares a little less about the data. They still care about the data, but they care about more global, how do we make the globe, the whole planet work together, right? Whereas 3.0 and 3.5 are still about us or our group doing well. 4.0 wants the entire globe, all groups to do well. So that'll help you sort those four pretty easily. Does that help?
Can I repeat it back and see?
Yeah.
So if you're in trying to sense into someone's developmental level, offer them a carrot for level likes that quality, and if they take it, you'll get the sense that they're at least above that carrot, and if they don't like it, you get the sense they're at least below.
Yeah, basically.
Giving like a little bit of freedom on those axes and stuff.
Yeah.
So then I'm left with the question of what happens if you find someone who's like a couple of levels below her. What then? What if there is still resistance and they're dropping down and down and down?
Yeah, well then, yeah, a lot of times that happens. Like if we get a shadow crash, we might crash to 1.5 and just be screaming and yelling at people because they don't agree with us, right?
And then work with it, I guess.
Well, yeah, it's probably time to disengage at that point, but but yeah, from a 4.0 and 4.5, what we want to do, well, 4.5, we want to see the developmental levels. And if we see the developmental level accurately, then we know that we're dealing with maybe 3.0. And we know that they're going to have a hard time seeing the opposite side, right? And so what we might do is work with them by talking about a different topic where they do see nuances that they're not so charged on. See if they can get to nuances and a more general discussion on any topic. If they can't, then you just accept that that's where they're at. But if you can get, then you might be able to tie them back to, now notice how you talked about the nuances of this. Can we talk about the nuances of our first topic now again? You know, and see if they can pull the skill of the nuances back to the other one. That's one way you could play with it.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Well, do you guys want another challenge, another breakout group challenge? Or yeah, okay, lots of thumbs up on that. Okay, here's the next one. This one's kind of fun. Okay, I want you to identify 2 new religions that are being formed in society today, one on the left, one on the right. They're being formed by 2.5s and 3.0s. We have new religions being formed, fundamentalist religions. I want you to see if you can identify them, and for the extra challenge, how did they come about to be? How did they get formed? New religions. And when I say new religions, don't get me wrong. It's not like you're going to have to work on this one, because they're not going to call themselves a religion, but they're going to be mythic oriented. They're new mythic statements that are being made. They're in the public sphere, and they're held to just as if it was a fundamentalist religion, just as if it was absolutely true. And if you do not believe it, they will consider you bad, wrong, shame, blame, guilt, and often even issue death threats.
Okay, I put that in chat so people can copy and paste, and then paste it into your breakout section as soon as Eloy's got that set up.
Yeah, I'll give a second. I'll give a few seconds to get that copied. And here we go.
Welcome back, everybody. Hey, nice to see you all. Did you guys come up with a couple of new up and coming budding religions? Yeah, how many people think they came up with some? Yeah, few of you, some of you feel like you're struggling. Okay, let's hear what you have to say. I'm curious to hear what you discovered. Yeah, great.
Vax and anti-vax.
There we go, beautiful. Tell me about the religion of pro-vax and anti-vax.
Well, we decided
yeah.
that people had a fear of authority. but yes, and they both quote data, and they both quote their own data, and they both think they have the right data, and they believe it intensely, and you can't argue with them.
Yeah, so you have these two extreme, these two different religions around it. Yeah, and some are actually even willing to be violent over it. And yeah, and that's beautiful, because the vax, no vax issue is actually a very complex topic. It has a lot of nuances to it, and it's not right for everybody, but it is right for a lot of people. It can be great for society as a whole, but maybe really damaging for certain individuals. There's all kinds of complex dynamics that are involved in the vax, anti-vax issue, but it gets simplified into pro-vax, anti-vax, and then you get these cultural signals, you know, about whether you are a pro-vax or anti-vax, or a pro-mask, anti-mask, you know, and now I got you in categories, you're in-group or out-group, and now I'm going to treat you like an in-group or out-group. Beautiful, nice example. Who else has another one?
I'll go.
Yeah, go ahead.
We came up with woke and QAnon, and but they're both at earlier levels. They're both coming from those earlier levels. So basically, what we decided was you just have to listen to them. You have to be able to really hear them and come from a place of compassion, so that you're with them from an integral point of view. And they may not even feel like you disagree with them, but they might also. But yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, those are the big ones today, aren't they? The QAnon and woke. And of course, you know, you think about QAnon and woke, and they actually got to this 3.0 mythic religious ideology in two different ways. Woke came from a 4.5, 4.5 awakening culture. This was all about, you know, compassion and love for everybody, inclusion, but they got sucked down to 3.0 and turned into an ideology and a religion. So you see people speaking really beautiful things that sound like 4.0 or 4.5, but the behavior, the process is about shame, blame, guilt, in-group, out-group, and it's really harsh and brutal, beautiful. And then QAnon actually came not from descending from 4.5 and being misinterpreted, but actually just growing up through to a kind of a natural 3.0, where you go to an extreme of a particular ideology. It came out of, in this case, the right wing. And 3.0 can get sucked into conspiracy theories, because of course they're just beginning to step out of the mythic, and they're starting to get rational, but they don't quite understand how it works yet. But they're being able to look into the myth and go, oh my gosh, that was a conspiracy I got sucked into my whole life. And now they're seeing it everywhere, you know, but now they're getting locked into an ideology and it's just an upgrade of mythic, really. It's based upon, you can put data to it, but it's not based upon really understanding science. And so it's kind of a mythic 2.0, so to speak. It's an upgrade. And so QAnon got it by growing up through the developmental spectrum to that 3.0 mythic irrational crossover place, where woke got it from hearing things from 4.0 and 4.5 and then misinterpreting it and turning it into a religion and turning it into a 3.5 extremist ideology and then treating it that way, which was not the intent of the fourth person perspective orientations that came up with woke. So two great examples. They also gave us great examples of two different ways that these new religions are being formed. Trump is, the Messiah returned, right? Yeah. Good job. Anybody else want to share?
I had the survivalists and the deep adaptation people as both feeling the same existential threat, but handling it differently.
Yeah. I don't know that realm that very well. Can you just speak to that a little bit?
Oh, yeah. Well, the deep adaptation people think that we're past the point of no return.
Oh.
And that we have to go from that point forward and see how we're going to survive. And the survivalists are just like,
yep,
we'll do what we have to do to take care of ourselves, and the heck with the rest of you. So
right,
the
right.
deep adaptation people are trying to do something for all of the world, but
beautiful.
It's the individual versus the collective, but with the same
versions of that.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Eloy. I wish I could talk more about it. I can't talk intelligently about that one. So thank you. Who else? I saw a hand raised, one of those artificial hands raised too.
Let's hear from the Tom's Living Room group.
Okay. Let's hear from the Tom's Living Room group.
Too far away.
Someone from our group already talked about the anti-vaxxers.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
Thank you. And then I also had brought up binary, the concept of non-binary versus binary.
Yeah. So we have the new religion. Can you identify the religious aspect of that? The religious ideological crossover aspect of that?
The religion, it would be that the denial that there's male, female.
Yeah. So this is a great one. What we have is the understanding of gender, and gender is actually a spectrum. So if we break down sex, gender, and sexual orientation, all that, sex is our biological XY, XX chromosomes. They are basically, they're fixed. Let me put it that way. I mean, you can't change them once you have them. I can't change my XX to an XY, right? But gender is the orientation of, say, masculine and feminine is an example of gender. And so I can actually slide and become more feminine. I can slide and become more masculine. And as a result, I can say that masculine and feminine are non-binary, right? I can see them as a spectrum rather than binary. Or I can say I don't buy into them. So I can do that. But then I don't understand the data. If I can do that with gender, then the more extreme version of that is I can do it with sex too. And then not being able to understand the nuances between what is actually fixed and what is fluid. And so fluid becomes the new religion. It's really cool to be fluid, which is, by the way, a great idea, but we can't just template fluid onto every aspect of humanity. It doesn't actually work correctly. There's more nuances to our entire biology than that. Some biology can be changed, especially with hormones and surgery, but the sex chromosomes at this point can be, and so they are fixed. And so the fluid religion wants to make everything fluid and isn't looking at the nuances. That's a good one. And that's a courageous one to talk about because it's on the left side. And sometimes, a lot of us maybe have a little more of a left-leaning bias. So that's courageous to talk about that one.
Thanks, Kim. I'm just being mindful of the time. We're at 5:58, so we're at the end. And thank you very much for joining us and I'm sure it seems like people had a really stretching experience exploring a lot of cultural ideas this evening. I think we put your website where we can get more information earlier in the presentation, but let's paste that into chat again so we can get more information about your work or contact you. And so thank you again. And then also a reminder of everyone to visit our website, sandiegointegral.org, for next month's event on March 11th and on our meetup site. And please RSVP so we know how many to expect. And you can make a donation on the website as well. And it being pretty close to 6 o'clock, we're going to move into our informal chat segment now. So thank you all of you who we understand people's time. You have places to get off to if you can't stay for our informal chat. But if you can, we would like to just kind of switch gears and we can start more informal asking questions back and forth. And so we appreciate and celebrate everybody, and because what it takes to have us all get here and show up on the screen, and for Kim Barta to make it here to Carlsbad, and taking up 2 hours of your Wednesday. We really hope we provided you some value with your discussions and input today. So thank you. And this ends our formal part of the meeting.
And goodbye to those who have to leave, and welcome to everyone who's staying. Good time to ask questions too. Oh, did we lose Kim?
Looks like he jumped off. He's in the Habib background there.
So we'll have to have our own party here since having a party over there.
I kind of have this open question of how to make person perspective taking more workable. Like, I think I can visit with various numbers on the list, but this like look from one and see how it looks from the other is kind of like a fancy dance. Is there more fancy dances that I don't know of that'll like help me dance around a bit more?
So Jerry, you've worked with Kim. Do you have something to contribute to Elliot's question?
Well, all I would say is, like, I personally I've never been good at picking out the person perspectives out of like real people running around loose. You know, like I know some people who are kind of fluid in it, like Kim is, where he sees behavior and he can determine where it lands in there. And I'm not that way. I think, you know, I don't know if it's a certain, you know, our Enneagram type or whatever it is, our personality type. Some people seem to be able to just see that and some can't. And I don't have much to offer in this realm because it's not something I've ever been able to do. I've studied it, I mean, for hundreds of hours, you know, but it just doesn't seem to get me anywhere. So I admire those who can do it. I think Kim is just actually, you know, astonishingly brilliant in being able to see to interpret them in a valid way that gives good information and good perspectives, but not my skill.
And Elliot, one thing I'd say is I feel like the question, as I understand it, is being asked from an exterior perspective, seeing, you know, in others' developmental levels, but something I'd throw out there that's interior is Kim has developed meditations that help you take a first-person perspective, strengthens that seeing in your own interiors through meditation designed exactly for that developmental level. And I have found those radically powerful. And I'm not sure if those are offered only in courses or if he has something on his website, like you can go in and do a specific third-person meditation he has designed. And there's nothing else I've ever seen like it. And I'm blown away by his, you know, I think he's got him going up into the 6th, 7th person perspective. And I'd take a month and I would do nothing but first person's perspective. And eventually I could actually see that as a realm. not just a perspective, but that seemed like a living realm to me.
I'm going to see if I can call in and get Kim back to lead us through a meditation like that. That would be awesome, right? Do you know how long that meditation is, Derek? It was like is it 5-10 minutes or?
You know what? Most
longer?
of these were 20 to 35 minutes.
Okay. Maybe you can do a shorter version for us.
Yeah, I'm sure he could.
All right. Keep talking and I'll go check on that.
I have a separate question of, you know, this is working with two different perspectives. What if you have 3 people in the room, or what if you have someone who's in 2 perspectives and someone who's in 1, or 2 people in 2 perspectives, or 2 people in 3 perspectives each? Then how do you get workable on the scale of more than 2 perspectives? Is it just they're all perspectives of 2, just like jumping between them, or is it that there's a possibility of having sideways perspective holding? I don't know if anyone has any insight into that one either. These are my open questions.
I think I would opine further on that. It might be more in a moment-to-moment topic, like in a group conversation like ours. Wilber talks about the dominant monad or something. I forget now, but sort of what the topic is and where the conversation is, because and sort of what's happening then, because then a topic changes to the next one. So it's almost like how we relate to this gathering, you know, I picture it like hands, you know, a pile of hands. So maybe that centralizes with almost like an octopus or a spider with a bunch of legs attached. I'm not sure that helps at all, but maybe topic centered might bring it together a little.
Interesting.
I'm very interested in where this conversation's going. And in fact, I put a question, I think it's disappeared now, in the chat for Kim. I think I framed it as something like, what if a 6 is speaking with, or not even speaking, communicating maybe with a 5.5? Is there a way, a non-dominating, non-manipulative way, if that 5.5, I'm just putting in numbers, is open? Is there, what do we know about helping them stand on the board and start surfing? If the willingness and openness is there, is how I would put it. And to continue on, which I think Joanne was just saying, similarly, one of the things I've learned in my work is it is never about the content. It's about the structure of consciousness.
Okay, he's coming.
Yeah, it's about the structure of consciousness. It's not about the content. So I always go to the structure. I go to the space and seeing the structure of all those, how that architecture appears, and it's invisible, but it's there.
My general hunch is that if you give people space and reduce their stress, they kind of grow up a bit. And maybe with a gentle challenge or a gentle invitation, they grow up. And if you challenge them, they grow down a bit. They like shrink in. So in that sense, if you think you're coming from a higher place, give the person who's sort of in a lower number space to like, and the benefit of the doubt to like stretch out, and maybe they'll start showing up in complex ways. But in terms of turning that into a serious practice, I wonder how to do that. Kim's back.
Hi. I think that politicians that want to reach people usually go to the lowest common denominators. And that's why, unfortunately, we never hear anything complex or trying to solve how they are going to solve problems. They just come to all kind of slogans and one sentence goals or whatever. Make America great again. Yes, we can do it. Yes, we can. All kind of things that the crowds clap and is excited about, but it actually doesn't. It's meaningfulness. Meaningless. It's, I don't know. But that's what that's what attracts people, because there is just the lowest common denominator is actually low.
Yeah.
Derek, can you frame that or tell Kim about the kind of meditation we're looking for?
Yeah, and Kim, Elliot had asked about different perspective taking, and I just mentioned that you had designed meditations for the different perspectives. And so there was kind of a general question around, would you be able to lead us through something in 3 to 5 minutes, looking at maybe a particular perspective?
Okay, sure. I'll invent one on the spot and bring you through it, okay? Okay. And you want it in 3 to 5 minutes. Okay. All right. All right, close your eyes. And I want you to imagine just noticing the darkness and the emptiness. Start with darkness and emptiness. And I want you to notice your senses coming online now, that you can hear my voice. And I want you to notice that you are hearing my voice. You're actually letting it in. You're receiving it. Your ears aren't coming out and grabbing my voice. You are receiving my voice. So just want you to notice that sound is a gift around you all the time that's coming in. A gift of the universe, and it's coming into you. You are receiving it. It's abundant and ever flowing. And I want you to notice that the sensations that you feel in your body, the fact that you can feel, these are coming into you, the air, the temperature, the freshness that you smell. Everything's coming into you. You are receiving it. It's abundant in the universe. The gift that will keep giving was giving long before you were born and will keep giving long after you are gone. You cannot over-receive it. There is too much. There is abundance. You are wealthy. Same with sight, the colors. And you might open your eyes now and just look around and realize that you are not looking, you are not grabbing the colors. They are coming into you. So notice that you are not looking at something. It is looking at you. It is actually going into your eyes. You are receiving it. You are not out there touching that color. That color is coming in and touching you. It's touching your eyes. So receive that abundance, the colors, the shades, the shapes, the structures, all coming into you, an abundant gift from the universe. An abundant gift that can never be extinguished because it is so abundant. All the sight, all the sound, all the feelings, all the smells, all the tastes, all the movement that you experience is all coming into you. It's a gift. And from that gift, from that precious gift of abundance, you will start having passions arise in you. And these passions will make you want to do things. You will be excited. They're your passions, not anybody else's passions, not God's passions, not society's passions, not mom and dad's passions. Your unique passions will rise in front of you. They will rise inside of you. And you just let them flow, and let them move you. Let yourself move from these passions and move. And as you go into the world, you will find that your passions will start interacting with other people's passions. And you can play with the interplay of these passions. And eventually you can maybe even start creating structures that will help bring these passions into the world. And people that love to follow your passions and be a part of it. And as you might follow other people's passions. And then you might get some great ideas about how you can get
these passions to have their most pure expression. And so let yourself flow in that pure expression of these passions and just enjoy the purity of it. And then keep in mind that there's a lot of wisdom and a lot of nuances on the other side of the purity. How does this purity interact with the absolute 50 shades of gray of life? How does this purity interact in real life, not in idealized situations, but in the real dirt and mud that life exists in? And how can we create a world where we all feel this abundant receptivity and our passions are rising into structures in the world where we all support structures throughout the entire earth that support all life to live their passions in an abundant and fulfilling manner? Let it be.
Thank you, Kim.
You are so welcome.
Kim,
Oh, hi, yeah.
I love the idea of the colors in sound penetrating each of us, because it's so easy to feel disconnected. And in reality, we're always connected at multiple levels. And, you know, not only the eyes, it penetrates right into the brain. So it's a beautiful metaphor. Well done.
Thank you.
Kim, I had a question.
Yeah.
While you were wandered off. This is in this work today, we did two perspectives. We did a higher number, lower number. My question is around moving to maybe like 3 or 4, or holding maybe more people in more places or more parts of ourselves and other people.
Mm-hmm.
Is that many instances of 2, like dancing around, or is there a movement to 3 or 4 or a greater number of perspectives at once?
Yeah, well, each perspective holds more perspectives. So first person perspective holds only their own perspective. Second person perspective holds me and you, and now we're friends. Third person perspectives holds me and you, an objective idea. This is where science comes in. I can step outside in the objective point of view, the observer point of view, and come up with a more scientific, more whole understanding that's not based upon my biases or my mythics or my ideologies. That's moving into third person perspective. And then fourth person perspective, and of course, one of your questions is not about height, it's about breadth. So like if we come back to 2.0 and we're being friends, can I be friends with only one other person? Can I be friends with 2 people? Can I be friends with 10 people? Where does my limit start breaking down at 2.0 to just engage in friendship, right? And the same with 3.0. How many people can I hold? How many ideologies can I hold before I shut it down because I can't handle the complexity, right? And same with 3.5. How much science can I hold? I mean, science is specialized now because there's so much science out there. How much science can I hold and really understand? So that's a breadth move. So we're talking about height and breadth, okay? There's also depth. That's another thing that I work with, depth, breadth, and height. Depth is how much nuance I can get into. So how much nuance can I get into with you, Elliot, right? How much nuances can we get into? How much nuance is going to get in with all of you? Now we're talking about breadth combined with depth, right? And then we have height, which we talked about more today, what's the developmental perspective that we can do this at. So when you're talking about 2 people or 2 groups of people or 10 groups of people, now we're talking about breadth moves at each developmental level. And so like at 4.0, ideally on a very broad level, we can hold all groups, all of the whole planet. And we usually see the big part, but it's the nuances that get us into trouble at 4.0. Even though we like to go deep into the nuances, it takes a while to go, can I get into the nuances of the KKK, for example? Or do I just paint them with a broad stroke because I don't want to? Has anybody heard of Daryl Davis? Daryl Davis is a Black man who befriended the KKK. He did the work. He did the work. And boy, talk about getting into the nuances and the details of it. But, you know, that's where the healing came from. That's where a lot of the KKK members gave up the KKK, because he had the courage to go in deep, get into the nuances with them. And it just melted them away from the KKK. And he did it without being judgmental or anything. Absolutely supportive, no criticism. True fourth person perspective way of creating change in the world.
He also seemed to do it one person at a time.
He does. So,
and my curiosity is about, I guess, depth and breadth together with height. Like
that's the idea. That's what I'm talking about. Depth, breadth, and height all together. That's
yeah. This is maybe a personal curiosity of like how to fit more in.
Right.
Because I have a depth that I see, I have a height that I see, but like as soon as I start to see another person with that breadth, depth, and height, I lose capacity for more breadth. And so I can't hold two people with that depth and height, or three, or four, or five, or like.
Right. Yeah,
right now, I don't think I can. I don't know.
Because you don't believe how large you are yet, Elliot.
Ooh. Okay.
See, the question changes. It's not how much I can fit into me. It's how large I can expand.
I would say that I feel like I can expand to great breadths, but then when I'm present in a group, I feel like I drop people as well. So I'm confused about that dance.
Yeah. Well, can I hold that expanded space where I'm holding all people, or do I lose it? Right? So sometimes when we expand, we zoom out and we lose the depth while we're expanding. So on a mental health issue, this is dissociation. I expand out so much that I don't feel anything, see anything, notice anything, right? But on a healthy level, when we expand out, we stay connected to everything deeply. And so if I can hold depth and height, expansion, and breadth, expansion at the same time, I don't lose the connection. I hold it all. But sometimes when we push our height, then we do lose some of the depth or some of the breadth, because we're pushing a new area of our life. So there's no judgment in that. It's just that, okay, now I can hold height. Now can I come back and hold height and depth and breadth at the same time? So you already talked about understanding that you can expand. So you've got that idea, but you're still coming up with the belief system. How do I fit it all in? Which means you've lost the idea of expansion. Otherwise, you wouldn't be needing to fit it in. That's not the same concept. I don't fit things in if I can expand. I expand around them. I don't fit them into me. Okay? That's what I mean by expansion. So I becomes much larger than my skin. I becomes maybe the, right?
My work, I'm just going to occupy all your time.
Well, Joanne has a question, so
go.
Maybe we'll come back, but
well, it just goes with this, and it's come and gone with me. How much of this depth, breadth, and height is dependent on cognitive, intellectual, logical, linguistic cognition, the cognitive line? Because if people are limited there, can they really not do anything? If in an average IQ, so to speak, loosely speaking, can't do this.
Well, IQ obviously has some impact, there's no doubt about that. There's so much to say in what you said that I'm not quite sure where to start. Right. First of all, yes, of course, IQ has impact, right? But not completely, because there's so many people that are just feel absolute deep love for the entire earth, and they don't think about it a lot, but they sure feel it. They walk around feeling it.
Yeah.
And so dependent is the word that I'm working on. If you want to understand it cognitively, then of course you need that.
Okay. That feels true.
Okay. Sandra.
My question has to do with if people do a psilocybin trip with a guide, how does that affect their personality? Will it, I think increase their levels more? I mean, just what do you think about psychedelics, especially psilocybin?
I have I've explored this to some degree, and I have yet to see psilocybin actually raise a developmental level.
Okay.
I think that you get really expanded states at the developmental level you're at, and people often interpret that as jumping major developmental levels. But when I actually listen to them and hear them and even describe what they're talking about, it sounds to me like they might have gotten more breadth at their developmental level. They might have gotten a new state at their developmental level, but I don't see the developmental level change. That doesn't mean that they're not valuable. If you can get expanded breadth at a developmental level, there's value to that. And I think that it's wise to do it with a guide. And I think that there's a lot of concerns there's a lot of people that are turning that into a religion and then turning it into basically dragging it back down to 3.0 in a sense, in the ideology. I think that there's a lot of addiction going on, and they're trying to pretend that it's a spiritual experience when it's really just an excuse to use. But I think the people that are doing it consciously and not routinely, I want to be careful about saying routinely, because there's some use medically for it routinely too. But if you're trying to use a spiritual state, I think the rule of thumb that I like to use is, if you're going to use it and then recreate it yourself. If you can't recreate it yourself, then you're just creating dependency. So why are you doing it? Right?
Don't states increase? I mean, if you have more state experience, there's more likelihood of increasing your level?
Anytime you have, those are two different questions. Yes, if you recreate a state experience, you will build the neural pathway. Now, if you create a neural pathway that is dependent upon an external circumstance, such as a drug or an experience, then you're building a neural pathway into that state through that dependency. So yes, you can create the state and you can make the state maybe even more robust. But what I'm saying is, I encourage people to be independent. So if you're going to create the state, now rebuild the state to get into it on your own, so you're not dependent. That would be my encouragement. I'm not here to preach to you. You do whatever you want, right? But I'm saying, that would be my, I think if you're going for what at least my best understanding of what holistic health would be, it would be not to use it as a dependency to get to it. If you want to use it, understand the state, and then recreate it on your own, so you have the entire pathway into it. And now it's a skill you have, not something that not like the Buddhists even talk about state chasing, right? The problem with state chasing. So if you're using the drug or the medicine, whatever people want to call it, and you get a state, why are you going back to the state with the drug? You're either creating dependency and addiction, or you're just state chasing. Either way, you're not doing it in what I think the wisest people would say is a healthy way to go about doing it. Yeah. Sarah? And then Ellen?
Shara, thank you.
Shara, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, I would love to get some of your perspectives on gender fluidity. And I speak to this as a mom of a teenager who's recently come out as trans. So I've had quite my own journey of navigating a lot of the complex concerns. What are valid concerns? What's love? What's evolutionary? What is good support? What is capitulating support? along with a lot of strong social views on each extreme. And in this evolutionary territory, wanting to be mirrored and reflected, you know, almost being told you're doing a good job. Like I have a need for that. So of course, there's a lot of trans hate. So there's a lot of responses I get that have a lot of ignorance to it. But then in some of my more, let's say, you know, integral spaces, there seems to be a leaning towards almost seeing this as a fad or as something that is a social contagion, which has not been the experience I've had with my child at all, actually. Maybe even a lack of curiosity that leaves me yearning to be seen or even understood or helped. So I have the sense you've explored this and been looking into this. And I'm just wondering, like the nuances of the trans movement, like when might it be appropriate? Or do you have a sense it's not? I wasn't sure what I was reading from some of your comments. And again, not right or wrong, but I'm curious of your point of view because you've been examining this.
Yeah, so I think when we start working with the nuances of trans, we want to understand what kind of trans we're really looking at. Are we talking about transgender? Or are we talking about transsexual? And people are not looking at the nuances of that language and the differences, and they get confused. And I think this is where children get confused because we have bypassed the nuances of the language. And so it's easy for children to generalize those categories. So for example, transgender is a very natural, normal thing that every child and almost every adult does. They explore a little more of their feminine or a little more of their masculine side. And you don't need to be transsexual to be transgender. And so I consider it a natural evolution because if you take a look at the history of this, Carl Jung in the West talked about the anima and the animus, the masculine side, the feminine side, right? Okay. And then we started raising children this way, more in the 70s or 60s, 50s, 50s, somewhere in there. And then those children grew up with a little more of a fluid understanding, but it was still, the society still held them pretty binary. So society held it in a certain way, even though many people in the culture were raising them in a more flexible way. And I'm talking about even conservatives were doing this. My brother, who's highly conservative, would give dolls to his son, and I mean, they wanted them to have variety, right? So it's not like this was even a liberal or conservative movement at that point. But then the next generation that came up grew up through that, and they turned it into kind of they simplified down the nuances of that, and they misunderstood some of the nuances of it and turned it into just exactly what we studied today. And so now you have a movement that's really almost a religious movement. It's almost like if your child is exploring trans and you don't almost like encourage them to be transsexual because they're experiencing some transgender ideology or experiences, that you are somehow anti-trans. And that's where it starts getting harsh, right? And that's starting to be out in the public. So, children are picking up on that. So I think that's probably where you're getting some people saying, oh my God, this is a fad. This is so horrible. Well, it kind of is, but it's part of what would be predicted based upon how we've grown through understanding trans. And so of course, children are going to be exploring this at a younger age in a more open environment. And it's a healthy thing to do. What's not healthy is when they get messages throughout society that don't understand the nuances between transgender and transsexual. And then they start thinking that the only way to solve this is through a surgery or hormone treatment, as if that's the only solution. And this is one of the religions that's forming right now, is that if you don't promote your child who expresses some transgender, if you don't promote them to be transsexual, that you're actually anti-trans. And it just misses the nuances and the important aspects of this. So
from your point of view, is there nuance where hormones and surgery might be appropriate?
There's nuances where this is where I would stand. I would encourage, I would love my child. I'd hear what they're feeling. I would hear what they're trying to explore. And surgery and hormone is a solution, not a religion. It's one solution of many. And I would talk to them about the many solutions, the harm that can come with each solution, and the benefits that might come with each solution. And but I would certainly talk to them. One of the things that I've done with trans children is I've shown them that there's sex, there's gender, and there's sexual orientation, and show that they are different categories, completely different categories. And you can be transsexual and not transgender. You can be transgender and not transsexual. You might be transgender and heterosexual or homosexual. You might, I just show that they are completely different categories, and that you can be transgender without having to go through surgery or hormones. You have that freedom. If you want to, you can, but you don't have to. You have that freedom. And I can tell you, there's a lot of kids that just breathe a huge sigh of relief when they just hear that they can be trans, but that doesn't mean that the solution is I have to do hormones and surgery now because that's what everybody says I need to do. I don't know if that's happening with your child, but that's where the religious side of the pro-trans movement is pushing kids to believe things that they don't have to believe. And the anti-trans is trying to limit them from being able to have any different ideology, right? So again, come from love. That's always the best move. And listen to what's happening for them and what they're needing. And I would listen for what they're needing, not what the solution is that they think will solve that need. Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's a really important distinction, because a lot of kids and even adults will say, you might say, what do you want? Well, I want a car. Okay, well, why do you want the car? Well, because I want a car, because I want to get around. Well, why do you want to get around? Well, because I want to be with friends. Okay, so they thought they wanted a car, but what they really want was to be with friends. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
And they don't even realize that. So when you start asking your kid, what do you want? Well, I want hormone surgery. I want hormone and surgery. Okay, well, what would that give you if you had that? Well, I would feel more comfortable in my body. Okay, I want to feel comfortable in my body. Great, let's explore all the different ways that you could feel comfortable in your body. And that being one of them.
And I also think there's a need there is something, even if it's a fad, that has an evolutionary component to it. There's a protest and or aspiration to transcend the roles that are being presented to youth today, I believe.
Absolutely. And that's what I thought I spoke to at the very beginning, starting with Carl Jung and how that's come about. That's what I was speaking to the whole time, is of course it's an evolutionary thing to transcend the roles. And those are gender roles. And those gender roles are not fixed to your sex. Mm-hmm. And you have complete freedom over your gender. And this is what's going on as they see. What we did was we used to hard link sex and gender. And that meant that we had a fixed gender and a fixed sex, and therefore your gender had to match your sex. And so what did we have to do? We had to cut off part of our personality so that our gender matched our sex. Well, now we're doing the exact opposite. We're saying gender leads, not sex. So what we're doing now is we're saying gender lead. So if I feel feminine and I'm a man, I need to cut off my part of my body to make it okay. And I think the next evolution of that is we don't have to cut off our personality or our body. We can, it's all free floating. Let's just let it be. Let's let go of this. The problem is hard linking sex and gender. And now we're just swinging to the opposite pendulum of that. And I'm not saying that that means we shouldn't do it, right? I'm just saying, I think if you look at the huge 100-year swings going on here, that's what we're looking at.
Yeah, and I think too, in like the transgender community, when you look on the coasts where the evolution and the maturity is perhaps more developed, it's even becoming more common to express male and female traits together.
Yeah.
Like I think the first step of transgender movement is to try to pass for the other gender. And then beyond that is actually like, you know,
holding them both.
Yeah, like being totally beautiful with your penis or something like that, you know. And I see in some of the communities in the art a real accentuating of both, even physically, in the same person.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%. I think that's exactly where our culture is evolving to, is stepping outside of gender roles. And eventually, what we want is a free society. I think what we're headed to is a free society where you can let go of the concept of gender, or you can express cisgender, you can express transgender, you can express whole gender. You have complete freedom. And it's not hard linked to sex. So you don't have to cut off your personality to meet your sex. And you don't have to cut off parts of your body to meet your gender. And that's not saying don't do surgery or hormone treatment. I'm just saying we're not doing it because of a misguided, evolutionary, culturally limited place where we are hard linking sex and gender. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you so much for your time and for your thoughts on that. Yeah.
Yeah, Eric's got a question, Kim.
Eric.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
So, wow, amazing program tonight. So thank you, Kim. I really appreciate all the nuance that you've brought to this. It's been very enlightening for me. And so just watching my shift right now, I feel sensitive to what's been brought up. Shar, I appreciate the concerns that you brought. So I'm kind of swinging in another direction. I want to do that with gentleness and respect, to pull in a question that's a little broader on the political. So the thing that I wonder, as an integrally inclined kind of person who feels called to be making, some contribution to the world, in particular in the realm of politics, it's like how to do that in a way that's, understanding these dynamics and also effective. Because I see, like I live in the United States, I think most of us do here. I don't know if everyone, but it's like we've got fairly crazy times, and we've got a lot of kids who are in charge. You look at the responses to the State of the Union address this week, or Kim, you and I are in the same state, and so watching what's happening in our legislature here, and wanting to bring the sensitivities and understandings that I have to make a contribution, and recognizing how challenging that territory is. And I'm wondering, what do you perceive to be the avenues of being effective? Where does one, to use an acupuncturist metaphor, where does the integral acupuncturist insert the needle into political kinds of situations, for instance, to create a more robust effect? Because these things actually, they do have practical ramifications, whether it's things on gender or gun control issues was brought up earlier. It's like we can't even consider red flag laws, for instance. It becomes absolutist that either never touch the Second Amendment or go ahead and confiscate them all. And I have a problem in this, black and white polarized, the curve goes out to the ends. And it's like, how to bring more dialogue in the middle when, often that's seen as being a traitor or whatever. What do you perceive as, effective ways of being politically active as an integrally inclined person?
Yeah. Who was it that said, if you want to change the world through politics, you will be infected by the politics before you make any change? I can't remember who said that. If nobody said it, I just said it. No. And that's just being playful. I think it's a great question, Eric, and I just wanted to bring up a little lightheartedness. And I think that that's important because when we're looking at political change, we are looking at the long game, okay? And a lot of times we want kind of instant change. It's kind of like this gender evolution has been occurring in the West since the 1920s. And this is where we're at now. And it's still not in the full healthiest place it can be. And so the same with politics. I think what we're doing is we have a lot of technology. So what I'm looking at is the underlying reason why 3.0 is so much more heard than the other developmental levels at this point. And I think it's the underlying technology, and Facebook, Instagram, all of them are predicated upon extremism, attention getting, and short-term attention getting. And I think if you want to make a change in politics, we have to make a change in technology, because the technology is going to lock us in there. I think you'll make more change in changing the technology. That's not to say that's the only way to do it. So I'll give you ideas how to do it on the political front. But just to give an example, in the 1970s, both the Republicans and the Democrats were actually operating at 3.5, not 3.0. They were really looking at the science. Even the Republicans were supporting the Endangered Species Act and water and air pollution laws, and they were voting for it. Then we got Reagan. And what Reagan did was he changed a law. And the law was that any news organization, if you present one side of an issue, you have to create an equal and balanced opposite side, so that no matter who was looking at any station, they got both sides of an issue every time. And that was a very important law that got broke down, and you didn't have to do that anymore. And right after that, we started seeing a divergence in the media between left media and right media. And it's gotten wider and wider and wider. And that allows us to stay in 3.0 longer, because it allows us to stay in our echo chamber longer. Facebook allows us to stay in our echo chamber longer. Instagram allows us to stay in our echo chamber longer. And so that all is biased towards 3.0, which of course Reagan was at 3.0, and which of course, and so our politics have actually regressed since then. And I think that would be, I think you'd be really working against the grain if we don't make some change in our technology. Let's just put it that way. It's going to be a real hard battle, even harder than it would otherwise be, which is also hard. Now, when we're working with 3.0, what we want to do is be able to hear them. And usually what you'll see in a 3.0 argument is they'll keep trying to go to the extreme to be more pure and more pure and more pure. And you can always find a way that it's not. And if you keep pointing out how it's not pure, eventually they'll break down under the weight of their own inability to make it more pure. And now you can get to more nuanced conversations, but you have to do that in a loving way, and in a kind of from an attitude of help me understand, almost kind of way, kind of equal, not playing dumb, but not challenging, absolutely not challenging. Just, I want to really understand where you're coming from. I want to really understand where you're coming from. So if you say this and this, but what about this? Oh, well then blah, 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 blah. Okay, so now you say this and this, but what about this? Oh, and eventually they start getting frustrated, and it's like, and sometimes what they'll do is they'll just get mad and say, well, you're stupid that you just don't understand. I'm just, you'll help just explain it to me, right? Or, but sometimes what you can get to is is there's a bit of a befriending that starts going on. And then you can share your point of view and they'll start hearing you because you heard them so well. And that's really what it comes down to is, can I befriend them well enough that they'll listen to me if I'm not preaching to them? So I'll give you an example. I live in, obviously, Western Montana, a very conservative area, and people are completely anti-socialism there. And so I was standing next to some neighbor, not a direct neighbor, but everybody knows each other to some degree, so a somewhat of a neighbor. And he is just complaining about socialism. And I just said, so you don't like the roads that we drive on? And he said, well, yeah, I like the roads that we drive on. Well, they're socialist roads. I mean, if it was private, if it was all private equity, you'd have to pay every farmer all the way to Missoula to get there. Do you want to pay every time you cross a property line? No, I wouldn't want that. Well, that's socialism in action. He's like, oh, I said, don't you like our military? Yeah, I like our military. Rah, 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 American military. It's a socialized military. It's completely socialism. So are you pro-military, pro the United States military? Or are you anti the United States military? And it's like, no, and he actually started getting it. And it's like, I'm not saying that socialism's the answer in every place, but there's a few places where it's kind of nice. And it, you know, in a small town, you get to notice how your words affect people, because it was a few weeks later and, you know, we were at some kid's ball game or something. And I heard him talking to another conservative person. Hey, did you know that our roads are socialized and it actually works really well? So this kind of befriending, connecting, but they're just giving examples, real life examples of the benefits helps.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Thanks, Kim.
There's lots we can do, and I know that we're at our time here. So, Eloy, thank you for indulging those extra questions.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, this is a little different because there's a group of people there, and Kim's waiting to probably eat dinner, and so thank you, Kim.
Happy to be here for you. Lots of love, deep appreciation.
You too.
Yeah, please don't take anything I says as an ideology or as a religion. It's got the nuances, keep the nuances.
I think he just asked us to quote him out of context and tell everyone.
All right, see you another time, Kim. Great.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
you are
Kim.
so welcome.
And thank you, everybody, for being here. We'll end the meeting here and see you next time.
See you next time.
For further information, including upcoming events, resources, links to our Facebook and Meetup pages, and our fabulous donate button, please visit our website at sandiegointegral.org. Donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue to provide information and connection within the Integral community.